Just a second. Hello, my name is Brad Hunt, and today is the 28th day. Is that right? 29th day of November 2023. Going to be reading from Phil Langdon's book called um, Heaven is a Cloud. But what I'm going to do is just read a particular section called Divine Leverage, which is part of this new part of his book. And we're going to be doing that right now. So appreciate you being here. And so we're going to go from here. It's called Divine Leverage. Come to know what is in front of you, and that which is hidden from you will become clear to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not become manifest. Saying number 5 from the Gospel of Thomas, Nag Hammadi Library. Logic dictates we will always find the underlying and invisible truth of anything when we simply look at what is and what it does. In objective reality, distinct issues must coincide to form a continuous picture that makes verifiable sense overall, no matter how deep it goes. We only need look around in the natural world to see a multitude of patterns, some of which are transient scale and size, and they are fractal, like repeating dynamic expansion, to see the potential for a unifying principle. Some of the nature's patterns are not always obvious in any given moment, though, as they work across time. For instance, we all know that a tree and the seeds it produces are a testament to the original seed that created them, proving its nature and prior existence by reproduction. An acorn will always make more acorns in a cycle or loop pattern, where one seed becomes many through a functional transition, like an oak tree, relaying the seed with the ground. By planting it is the primary function or catalyst for their unification as a tree, which then becomes the function that turns the original seed into many more. The new seed completes a cycle of expansion and abundance that relates in continuity back to the original discreteness in the production of new seeds. So Phil has always shown these what we call 3 acts. He talks about that in movies and plays. You're first to introduce what we call the characters in the first act. You say hello, you happen to meet somebody out of, randomness, so to speak, on the street. The next thing you know, Act 2 reveals what we call a relationship. So there's what we call something happens. Either you meet this person and you supposedly fall in love with this particular person, but you find out that she's not what you think she is, da, 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 da. And then eventually we call it Act 3, which is what I call, you go through all these struggles in Act 2, and then 3, you simply come to the point of simply it's union. It becomes whatever it happens together if that's meant to be, say, in a relationship with a particular person. If not, it doesn't work out or you find someone else, so to speak. But there is union there always. A simple geometric allegory for the same expansion starts with a single point like a seed that expands through a process of addition and accumulation, like a tree producing a potential limitless numbers of copies of the original seed. Geometry of this process is the simple expansion of polygons that naturally start with a single point, expanding into 2, then 3, and adding points and ad infinite. That is, you'll continue on and on and on until you get to the point of the infinity, which is basically the circle. I was hoping to be able to share this part actually to do with sharing the screen. This particular program I have doesn't seem to work. I don't know. It's supposed to be able to present it. I could actually show you the diagrams in this particular book. And that was what I was under the impression this was going to do. But I can share the screen, but the problem simply is that it doesn't allow me to do any further than that. So it must be a problem with this particular deal. But anyway, let's continue on. As the number of points increase to infinity, the limit of sequences becomes a circle with an infinite number of points as its circumference. In the process, the original discreteness has been sacrificed and turned into a continuous cycle, leaving a potentiality infinite hole that lacks a definite center. Of course, defining the center of a circle on paper is simply a matter of using a compass to make the center in the first place. However, it is the infinite concept, that is, the circle, represents that is important, since we are conceptually defining the center of infinity itself, which naturally has no center, being continuous, limitless, timeless, and ineffable, and undefined. The appropriate allegory and means to accomplish this task is known in geometry as squaring the circle. Being technical and impossible to complete algebraically with the classical restrictions of using only pencil, compass, and a straight edge, the philosophy of making a square from a circle stands as the appropriate symbolic allegory for defining the impossible center of infinity. The circle as the infinite is recast as a measurable square with the same circumference as the circle to guarantee the correspondence of a center. The square esoterically represents the fourfold nature of the natural world, while the circle represents ineffably unmeasured spirit, known as metaphysics, above common physics, that is. In other words, is superior to physics. Once the square is defined, its center is geometry implied by crossing opposite corners, shown on the left below. In so doing, the center of the circle is defined in the process, and by influence, a definite center is in the infinite continuality, shown on the right as a discrete point surrounded by the continuous circle. So what happens, squirreling the circle does allow you to come to the center, the point of the circle. That's why the whole perspective here. I'll give another illustration. Say, you aim for the bullseye. Okay, so your perspective is you get the arrow back and the bow and the arrow, and you get ready to shoot the arrow at the bullseye. That is your ground zero, so to speak. That's where you want to hit. You want to go in that area. That's what you're looking for. That's what we would call basically, in some ways, looking for truth. Because you don't want the outer part, so to speak. You want the center of the bullseye. That's your whole perspective. Okay, and most people are not even aiming at that. You see, they're aiming somewhere else, so to speak, and they're not. There's no way they're going to find the bullseye. You see, and you have to know that. And that's part of simply is as you grow older, you see things differently. You become a little bit more mature, and you see things that this what I did 20 years ago doesn't mean anything anymore. It may put some things together, but as Phil explains, is when you become approximately 40 years old, some of those things begin to fall away that you used to do 20 years before. You start to grow up, so to speak. So again, I'm just giving an illustration of that. Continue on. Crossing the square like this becomes the allegory to how we can use the physical world as the logical means to decode and understand the singular truth it is rooted in. Extrapolating to the infinite extremes of both the idea of a discrete point and its surrounding continuality gives a pointed singularity and an infinite expanse beyond measure as the greatest distinction they can have. The only difference between them as common singular entities at this extreme is that the circle distinctly highlights an undefined gapping hole. A circle can have any size, of course. The only distinction there can be then is between its discreteness and its continuity. A condition is fulfilled philosophically and geometrically by the unit point and circle as either side of the zero-dimensional nature that represents 0, 1, and infinity all go hand in hand. Their relationship is simply defined by the function 1/(n), where n is any integral number from 1 to infinity. As the value of the number n decreases towards 0, the value of the fraction, say 1/5, this is my example, increases towards infinity and vice versa as it increases towards infinity. So 1/5 decreases towards 0. So he shows a point here, square in a circle. It's just like what we look at as a trumpet type of thing. What you're doing here is similar to what I was saying back to the bullseye deal. It's a wide part, the first part like a trumpet, and then you get narrow to the point simply is that it becomes 0 at the bottom. But you can look at it the other way simply is that the 0 is down in the very narrow part till you always get to the point of being infinity as it becomes wider as the trumpet is. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. Like any event or story that has a beginning, middle, and end, square in a circle is the philosophical archetype of the expansion of a point into a circle. So that's what this whole thing basically shows here. It's a trumpet-like looking figure, the fullness of which completes the range of its own potentiality when reconnected back to the point of origin, unifying discreteness and continuity, again, defining the same three-act dramatic event as the seed-making process, but in pure philosophical sacred geometry terms. By recognizing this pattern, we can apply it to our reality and predict potentialities that naturally present themselves. To know anything means to compare or contrast one thing with another. Of course, that's the only way to find out if it's, for real or not. You have to compare and contrast and say, okay, is $5 worth more than, $3 or $4.50, so to speak? Well, you have to compare, you see. In reality, simply say, well, how about this? Well, I have $5 here, but I have over here a gold coin or a silver coin worth, $5, which is more valuable. Well, naturally, in an inflated society, the $5 silver is far more valuable than the $5 because the dollar itself, the $5 is deflated. Just a part of simply, learning things and comparing and contrasting things in that matter. As a combination, the square circle sequence naturally defines two extremes in the first and second acts and adds them together in the third act. The resultant square circle, that is, in this sense, becomes the measuring unit of singular range, containing all from 0 to infinity, and directly represents our personal natural range as spiritual observers. After all, that's what we are here, you see. We are spiritual observers because we came from spirit. So what is our measure? And they'll continue to share here an example, again with the Act 1 of the acorn, Act 2, what we call the relationship, and then Act 3 being the union of many more acorns, you see. And that means simply you have discrete with the singular deal here with the acorn, and you have a continuous, that is the part of the process that begins. Basically, we're looking at the tree, so to speak, and then you have what are called discrete continuity when you have more acorn nuts, you see. The discrete center point and continuous circumference of the square circle are effectively 2 points with an inside/outside relationship of equality. We can take any point on the circumference and draw a circle from that point with the same radius and produce another circle interlocked with the first as if their respective centers. This first geometry form is known as the Vesica, V-E-S-I-C-A, Piscis, P-I-S-C-I-S, meaning fish bladder, due to the central portion resembling the bladder of a fish. He shows that here, a unit square in a circle, and then finding the center, and then drawing another center going inside that particular original circle, and then the part in the middle is like what we call Vesica Piscis. The fish bladder form in the center of the two circles can be encased perfectly in a double square whose side lengths we can take as a unit value or simply 1, giving a full height for this double square as 2 units. If we distinguish the upper portion of the full diagonal going through the double square from lower left to the upper right with the comparative value of the square root of 5 and arc it down to the horizontal center line from the upper square, we find the growth proportion dubbed as phi, embedded and hiding in the fine structure, the very proportion of anomic expansion found throughout. So what happens simply is, when you do that, you actually have a rectangle now inside those two circles, which are one circle now. You see, it becomes all the such and such. So you have a square, not a square, I mean a rectangle, sorry. Shows it here, a Vesica Piscis golden section. The vesicle begins a process of self-replication that fulfills its range by completing a layer of circles around the original circle, forming the geometric seed of life. Even though the expansion of the square circle completes a geometric seed of life, the seed geometry is still only the implied nature of the square circle. All we have done is shown the fullness of the square circle by drawing the 6 circles around it. Expanding a third layer constitutes the action that finally reproduces the seed again many times over and makes the geometry of the flower of life a hexagonal array that is filling all spatial potential in 2 dimensions only, suggesting a natural limit has been reached, as we find in the initial unit, the square circle, and the 3 steps. Again, he shows that here in his booklet. And by the way, you can pretty much show, as well as I can say, you can probably download this book from his site, as far as I recollect. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's correct. If we want to apply the sequence to reality, which may work, since the flower of life predicts the production and reproduction of seeds, which applies to nature's cycle, we need to consider the dimensions of reality, expanding what we call the same 3-act sequence into 2, 3, and 4 dimensions from the original 0-dimensional point. The square circle, as the foundational 2 dimensions unit, becomes a sphere in 3 dimensions and a torus in 4 dimensions when we include time as process. The torus is a figure detailing the seed-like relationship between discreteness as a whole and its continuity as a surrounding spiritual form, otherwise known as hypersphere, a sphere with a hole in it. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. There's a guy who actually has done this, what I would call this whole thing, years ago. And I know his name. It escapes me right now. He has a website, and he did these videos many years ago, I think at University of California at Berkeley. And he had a group of students there with him. His name was Stan Tenen. I'm trying to think of the website, but you can probably just type in Stan Tenen on YouTube, and it will be eventually, I think you just maybe type in Torus, T-R-U-S, and there will be the example. Some people call this a donut, so to speak, and then you have a guy later on who elaborates even more on this somewhat. It's a guy named, I want to say Penrod is his last name, P-E-N-R-O-D, if you want to look more into that. Again, that would be probably on a YouTube channel again, but I can't think of his, right now I cannot remember his first name. Penrod is his last name. All 4 dimensions of space and time are accounted for in the sequence from the 0-D point inside the curve 1-D line of the circle, like the 2-D spiritual circle, to the 3-D volume and 4-D process of the torus. Each contains the basis of the next. Let me see something here. Well, let's see. Let me look up this real quick. I can find something real quick. Just bear with me. Come on, engine. Let's go. Search it. Yeah, the foundation is called Meru, M-E-R-U Foundation. So when you go in there on YouTube, then you can go. There's many videos he has. Stan Tenen, that's T-E-N-A-N, and Meru, M-E-R-U, and he'll talk about certain things in here. The meeting tent episode. There's tons of information here. He talks about the alphabet. He talks about the Hebrew alphabet also, which represents what we call numbers in the Hebrew, which most people do not know. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Again, his name is Stan Tenen, and the organization is called Meru Foundation. And let's see if we can get back where we're at. So let's see. The circle is a surface like the sphere, yet the sphere contains a volume akin to the torus, implied as the area within the original circle. In so doing, we find a 3-act square circle process predicts the expansion of dimension in the same discretely continuous terms, correspondence, the torus as the third and final stage is derived from both the point square circle and the square directly by joining opposite sides of a square that joins 7 points together. Interesting that it says 7. Again, 7 is a very critical number, not only very much and so in the Bible, especially in the book of Revelation, but elsewhere too, to first form a tube and then a torus. That's also illustrated here. Mapping this continuous process in terms of the simple method of discrete geometry, that is using points and lines to represent identities. So there's one section is called dimensions, the next section in the middle is discrete, and then the last part is called continuity. And so to represent these identities, define the seed as a simple point. Everything comes from a seed, folks. That's what also is very critical. If you look at the sayings of Jesus and what it says in the New Testament, you'll many times say the kingdom of God is like a seed. That's what he speaks of in that term, seed. The mustard seed, also a very small seed, yet it produces this gigantic tree, supposedly. Again, representing three acts, so to speaking, you see. And it's interesting also, I'll just say at this point, the way a tree works is simply it's a seed and it germinates and comes out. And eventually what happens is you see what we call in the daytime or outside, the external is that you see little branches starting out, such and such. Well, that's the same thing underneath is taking place. In other words, the part where you don't see, the internal part is doing the same thing that's going to the ground. It goes deeper into the ground as it goes further upward. And the part is simply is in the darkness part, so to speak. That is where the seed is germinated. It's growing down such and such, and it begins such and such. And I found out from a friend of mine years ago that, are you aware that trees that are together also actually unite together underneath? Do you follow what I'm saying? The roots actually unite with the other ones. So a lot of times when one particular tree gets hit by some type of thing, it affects the other trees. I don't know if many people know that or not. That's what this particular friend shared with me. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Let's see where I was at. So mapping this continuous process in terms of the simple method of discrete geometry, using points and lines to represent identities, defines the seed as a simple point on paper. And the continuous ground, yes, that's where I was at the line, two separate points below it. The ideal tree they produce is spherical in dimensional geometry, but a triangle of the three original points discretely unified to discrete their function relationship. Yes, because when you just look at it, for example, let's just think about Christmas trees. Just the best effort I can think. But it's a triangle shape. It's a triangle shape when it's up, when it's up in the exterior world. You see. Now I don't know what it is below there, but I'm just giving you an example, and it becomes a triangle in the shape wise. But the spirit is central, becomes the focal point of return, generating a whole through which process can be controlled. The torrid process is therefore self-referential, akin to the seed-making process that reproduces itself and completes the table of expansion from a point using the unit square circle process as the foundational principle. Like the handoff in a relay race, you see, the tree cannot be made without the seed, and the U seed cannot be made without the tree. They work together. It's almost like the chicken and egg deal. The same thing. Which one came first? You see, the seed or the tree? They each produce and rely on the other. With the aid of the outside world they exist in. A seed, in this sense, is the natural unit of its own lifestyle. Discretely, that is, the triangle sees the birth of a new seed within itself, as they appear in the branches of a tree, forming a discrete tetrahedron as the fourth point of the complete life process. The overall sequence constitutes the classical tree of life, or plan of creative action, based on the natural relationship of duality, has with itself as unity. See, that's another important point most people don't realize. Most people don't understand to see the point of duality. Duality is the point eventually to revert to what I would call eventually to see the singularity. But you have to see the 2 points. You have to, again, this is what I call comparing as part of also to do with duality. You see, comparing the 2 points here, 2 things, whatever's here, making a comparison. In fact, this whole idea of thinking, people talk about meditating. Well, meditation is not simply just being quiet, such and such. Meditation is actually comparing one against the other. And that's what it's doing. It's to actually to bring you to the point, you see, when you stew with this whole thing within your own mind. The 10-point tree of life of Kabbalism fame is in fact the same natural philosophy as the Eastern yin yang concept in Taoism. The symbol for unity, duality, and balance, all together as one unit laid out as a sequence of 10 points. When applied to the natural reproduction cycle, discreteness relates to definition and objects with dimensions and boundaries, whereas continuity relates to process and transformation over time, as if taking a observational perspective. In other words, you're looking up, down, like you're omni perspective. You're looking at things, and you're up here, and you're looking at things on Earth, such and such, and you can see how things look from down, which gives you a completely different perspective than being actually on the ground. That's why, when you climb a particular mountain, it gives you a better idea of the valley below you, where the stream is at, all that type, where that stream goes at, so to speak. You can see for miles, so to speak, from there. Without that, you would not know where, where the headwaters were, actually, if you did not climb that mountain to see where the stream is going out. Again, that's the omni perspective, so to speak. Oh, let's see where we at now. Okay, so the physics of life is always available at any moment. Metaphysics is beyond the level of moment as a process, only visible across time. It allows us to see further than our immediate moment and predicts the nature of all relationships as an automatic process that leads, if continued, to unification. The very moment that starts the process off again as a new generation of seeds in application. The tree of life is, thus, an ideal figure that discretely defines a tetrahedron of 4 points to map the discrete continuity of life as an idealized geometric seed and fruit. So what happens simply is you have a tetrahedron, you see, and eventually he shows that also in the torrid cycle, okay? I don't think, do I have that here? I don't think, do I have it here? Well, anyway, it's just basically it's like a pyramid. When you look up from again up at the top, you have the top stone at the top. I want to say cornerstone, but that's not what it's called. All of it comes together, and you have 4 points because you have 3 individual what I call points on the ground, so to speak. One, and then you have the one at the top, just like a mountain. You see, same thing. And then he shows it what they call a torrid cycle the same way. The correspondence between the torus and tetrahedron means we can map them together as a single process. The 7-color map on its surface is bounded by these 3 coils from which we define 3 discrete points exploding out from the center singular hole, forming a expanding tetrahedron frame. In the process, if we keep our original point in the center, at the outermost part of the cycle, the tetrahedron frame flattens into a triangle of the 3 points with a point in the center, as we find in the 4 portions of the tree of life archetype. The subsequently contraction made to the hole of the other side stretches out to the tetrahedron frame, again, from the flat triangle, as the 3 points make their way back around into the hole, completing the tree of life. We see it in 2 ways here. We can see it in what we call discrete, and we can see it also in the continuity. Discrete would be simply like the seed, okay? The seed, one seed, and it germinates with a tree. And then what happens? That tree grows, and then it drops acorns again, those seeds, to the ground, and then the seed itself is the one being singular, and then the tree is the triangle, and then what we call the new seed is the tetrahedron. And then it continues on. The tetrahedron becomes what we call a cube, and then eventually the cube becomes a octahedron. That's a cube octahedron. Meanwhile, when you talk about continuity, it goes back to the point, and then a circle, and then what we call a discrete circle, that is continuity. And eventually it leads to the seed of life, and then eventually to the flower of life. In this way, the torus and its process models the three critical stages in the unfolding of any process as 3 points of transition or transformation, corresponding with the square, circle, archetype, and the 3-act drama format. Over the course of its process, the expanding and contracting tetrahedron frame shares the central point of twin tetrahedrons, tip to tip, defining the 8 points of a cube when unified as a Merkaba, M-E-R-K-A-B-A. If we add a feather tetrahedron frame to all 8 tetrahedron corners in the Merkaba, it gives us 8 times 8 equals 64 tetrahedron corners in total, and defines the frame of a Q octahedron, the first platonic solid whose frame can invert through itself like the torus. The 64 grid tetrahedron formation is akin to the 64 squares on a chessboard, a game associated with the drama of human life, centered in the mind and its 3 phases of youth: middle-aged, youth, middle age, and old age. He gives an illustration simply is that basically, you're a child, you have 4, you're crawling, you grow up, you have two legs as you become mid part, which he also illustrates through what I would call the way the sun, the beginning of the rising in the morning, and it becomes in the middle part of the day, you're basically midlife, and then you go further on down, and eventually you are old age, you become older, and you pass. Arranging the formatted sequence of shapes defines a 7-stage process cycle of correspondence between discreteness and continuity. They hand off from one to the other in a kind of a relay. The basic double tetrahedron, or Merkaba, inside the cube octahedron, becomes the central defining seed point of the square circle infinity that starts the cycle off. So he shows this whole thing, what I would call a discrete continuity cycle, and then goes through the continuity part, and it's just like this and back up. So it's an upside down, what I call a triangle. You have what I call, and he uses this all over the place, deal with the seed, whatever you want to call it. And also to do with life on this planet. When it starts out as a mineral, it becomes a plant, vegetable, such and such, and there are many other things that go along. And there's all 7 cycles. Now you understand simply when we go back to the perspective of simply is that God created the earth, created this whole place, and it took 7 cycles, and he used 7 days. You see, 7 days may be what we call figurative, what was going really on, the cycles it was taking place to actually create life on this planet. As such, the Merkaba is a defining seed that flowers into the cube octahedron through the cycles of discrete continuity. When the circle is squared 7 times overall in this geometric process that reproduces itself in the same expanding relay loop we find in the natural world of acorns and oak trees. Now all we need to know is how to apply it. And this is a quote from the saying for number 89 from the Gospel of Thomas in the Nag Hammadi Library. Jesus says, quote, "Why do you wash the outside of the cup? Do you not understand that the one who created the inside is also the one who created the outside?" You see. So it's interesting. You're admiring the outside, you're cleaning it, so to speak, and but you're not admiring basically the inside part, and then realizing this unification of the whole thing, the outer and the inner. You see. From a physical point of view, the infinite pulse is but a finger snap, a timeless, ultra-thin slice of an event at the beginning of time. The fleeting nature of the fluctuation is infinitesimal. In other words, a very quick moment, a pure, robust truth, reason, and leverage that guarantees the singular and limited nature of the cosmos. A mere flash of a moment, like a ringing a bell, whose qualities becomes expressed and spread out over the variant of time at the fullness of the cosmic expansion. And this is, you'll see, represented in what we call a seed. Let me see if I've got this thing here. I think I do. Maybe I don't. We'll see. This particular book. Uh, I don't think so. I think it would be in here somewhere. He illustrates this in different parts of this book. All these books he has are downloadable and free. You can buy one. There's nothing wrong with that. But he also gives illustrations of this also in this particular book. This was the part. This is kind of the deal here. I hope you can see this. This is what I call the upside down triangle here. And just going to give you kind of an illustration here of what it looks like. And that's what I'm speaking of, just what he was talking about here just a moment ago. So anyway, back to the part of what we call the tree of life, and what we call the seed is the tree of life and the tree of good and evil. One is constant, one is variable. The one on the left-hand side is constant. The one on the right is called variable. The one on the variable type looks just like it becomes like a tuba in some ways, you see, which in some ways I think he's illustrated. It's almost like the galaxies out there upon us in space. Let's continue on. Just as a quantum energy, that is a particle in a box, can tunnel out of its containment potentialities appearing outside its boundary, but within the outer limits of its leaking probability distribution. So spiritual ascension as a significant universal subjective event may leave its mark as the same timeless point by everyone who experiences it, or consciously tunnels to it, reinforces its significance repeatedly at t equals 0. Eggs cannot be unscrambled and put back in their shells. Of course not. Just so, the cycle of accumulation that leads to the unification of seeds is comparable to the unidirectional flow of the arrow of time and reveals a definite cause and effect to events. Likewise, since an oak tree grows from an acorn, we can take the product of a metaphysical seed to be a tree that incorporates its properties, unify it as the observer natural learning environment. Awareness is made of the observer and the observed, a place of light and dark, or tree of good and evil. Personal choice for the observer, you see. In other words, the automatic consequence of which is having no one to blame for our developing experience but ourselves. There's no one to blame. This is a stumbling block for most people. They see all these bad things in society, and they blame God. Okay, because it's taken a limited perspective. It's not taking a broad way and seeing the whole picture. This is a really critical issue for people. They allow that to be a stumbling block. And reality simply is they stumble. They don't see. You see. Don't let that be a stumbling block. Okay. The automatic consequence of which is having no one to blame, yes, for our developing the experience but ourselves. Yes, we have the opportunity to do this. But that's your choice. You see, you have free will here. You always have free will. Okay. And people cop out. And everybody does it. Don't get me wrong. Nobody's better than anybody else. We all cop out in some way or other. You see, the highest of being forever remain blameless and spotless forever. He gives another illustration here of what I would call looking at it as the tree of life in what we call zero dimension, the tree of good and evil. In other words, it's a pointed deal with what I call with the triangle this way, and the tree of good and evil are pointed the opposite way. In other words, you have it going downward, so to speak. I wish I had shared the pictures. But anyway, at the manifest opposite to his metaphysical seed, the resultant expanding space-time, Universe can be modeled with the same 3 in 1 metaphysical pattern in 3 dimensions of space and 1 imaginary dimension of time. This mirror effect is modeled in the vertical array of Tree of Life as an inverted triangle of the 3rd and 4th levels, devoting the upright triangle in its upper half to the metaphysical seed in application. Mapping the cosmic relationship onto the 3-act drama places the metaphysical seed at Act 1. The cosmos is a tree that grows from it in Act 2, leaving Act 3 to predict the nature of a black hole, complete with singularity and event horizon, portrayed philosophically and geometrically as the unifying streams of a simple point and circle. The suggestion being that the 3rd act represents the reunion of energy with the metaphysical source at t equals 0, precisely the same state as the event horizons of a black hole. By simple extension, we can predict what comes in other applications, like the logical prediction of a return to the original t equals 0 state from a massive time dilating position in space, in a network of black hole seeds that makes a great cosmic spider web of energy across the known universe. And you've seen that. Let me take a break here really quick here. We've seen this like with these pictures from the Hubble, and now another particular telescope is actually out beyond that, a stronger telescope. I can't think of the name of it. It's only been out there for a year or two, maybe. Hold on a second again. And so we would see the Hubble one would show these like these spider-looking type things, like of these universes out there, such and such from the past. You see, and this other one, I think it's got 2 names in it. I can't think about it. Anyway, as the infinite circle is centered philosophically, so space-time is energetically centered throughout by the extreme singularity surrounded by its event horizon as t equals 0, closing the energy loop and squaring the cosmic circle to its source from within its own confines. Comparing the overall esoteric picture of reality with the discrete tree archetype reveals the 4 classic mystical worlds and an overall split between the upper and lower halves of the tree, representing the natural split between the upper and lower worlds of spirit and energy, Shiva and Shakti, or the Tao one. I can't think of the thing. It's another one. The first level applies to the cosmic source of or world of imagination, the infinite pulse, the true source of the light and its condition, otherwise known simply as God. The second relates to the world of creation and the completion of the metaphysical triad that includes the Son of God, the one that rings the cosmic bell from its leverage point at 0. Starting the lower half of the tree with a spherical distribution instead of a discrete point defining a position, we can apply the next rate of change to the cosmic expansion, acceleration, and relate it to the world of formation, since the cosmos is mostly about energy, mass, and form. So there's 3 issues here. The Trinity. The only thing left to apply at the lowest level on the tree are the controlling brakes for the acceleration, that is the runaway train, that is the cosmic expansion. A return to 0 of the seed condition, but is purely physical terms. Philosophically speaking, the expanding and changing sphere must be reckoned with its own origin, just as the square circle is centered to complete the cycle of corresponding, resulting in the torus form, a shape that represents self-referential process at any scale. A sphere with a hole in it. At this level, black holes are worlds of action that constitute energetic produced seeds distributed across the branches of the cosmic tree like a giant cosmic spider web. In this scheme, the action of energy dynamic shifts emphasis and goes from being energy that holds a position in space-time to a whole, H-O-L-E, defined by the energy around it. A whole implies a boundary, like the empty circle is simply geometric, as a nod to the first stage of squaring a circle, to be completed by the singularity at the heart of the black hole that reconnects with the original t equals 0 state. In the case of the mountain, there is plenty of dirt underneath defining the singular tip or vanishing point. meaning there is simply no such thing as a naked singularity. In realistic physical terms, you see, it must be defined something to say, oh, here is a singular point. The simple definition of a whole, after all, is HOLE, after all, is nothing with something around it. Quote, it is the something around it that defines the whole, not the nothing of the whole itself. You see, that's how we see it. In other words, when we suddenly see that the ground goes in, like into the ground outside, and you say, well, there's a hole here. You see, um, this maybe a bad analogy. I'm sorry. Then he speaks about what I call stellar life cycles. Also here, what we call birth, and then the main sequence, and then what we call old age. Again, this is all to do with what he shared before, even with the sun across the horizon as it goes from starting from the certain part here in the United States from the east to the west, and then to death, and then remnant, you see. Once born, black holes subsequently follow the same patterns as a human being from birth to death, just like the cosmos they are born into. They are born in the already existent reality from collapsing stars and grow by consuming mass until they become adults that produce their own children at the content of galaxies. This is true. This is why the Hubble telescope has shown this. And now this is more vivid with what's happened from the past, because now we can see farther back, way back, farther back in this particular telescope of other universals. The graphic below shows recorded stellar life cycles as they take a variety of courses in time, depending on their mass, ending with the most ominous and destructive black hole that can hover over all other cosmic products, and subsequently producing the basis of life that leads to the potential reproduction of the creative principle. Black hole center galactic content makes its way back up the tree archetype, returning to the monad, single point, and the rationale of a person, expanding out the four levels of the archetype with a return count back up to the origin produces a natural 7-stage cycle in which we can see a natural progression of biological systems rising in ever increasing complexity towards the rational being who gains wisdom. It's either done for archetype or by through what he calls the kingdoms. And the kingdoms is done basically upon what we call the starting out with atomic energy somewhat. Let's see if I can remember it completely. And then what you have eventually will create minerals, and then minerals eventually would lead to plants, and then plants will eventually lead to animals, and then animals will lead to humans. So that's part of it. The left side of the sequence is purely automatic and energetic with a yin-yang relationship. In other words, you have to have two to tango. In other words, in order for even a chemical reaction to take place, there has to be a duality. There has to be a duality. There has to be two different things going on or more. Then that causes it to become something else. That's science. But that's also the way life is today. I mean, that's how life takes place too. You see, there is different materials being put in a jar, so to speak, and see what happens. Or we would call simply the Shakti and I forgot the other one. But anyway, it's energy and stationary type of thing. One stationary type of deal, and the other one's the energy, so to speak, goes around and around, so to speak. Anyway, that might be a bad analogy too. Sorry about that. In the application of the electromagnetic spectrum in the second identity, that is kingdom shown as a rainbow of waves in the graphic implying the entire electromagnetic spectrum below the creative quantum event. And the next level is a simplified graphics of an atom pertaining to mass from energy, as well as the atomic energy table of elements. Finally, the fourth level shows the networking idea we find with black holes, but in this application as linking atoms comprising the mineral or molecule kingdom as the much smaller mass scale. The right side of the sequence represents the development of gender-driven living systems, more complex pattern that gains more and more physical freedom towards the greater leverage point in minimalism. There is rhythm in the order of atoms and the heavens, as stars with planets and moons that harbor biological systems. At this level, the nature of cause and effect become more pronounced in the life cycle process of plants. Gender-driven animal life, that's right, then develops mentally to the point of high intellect as rational beings who can gain personal spiritual ascension graduating out of the process universe. So I'm going to give you an illustration of the plants because I think I don't even know if he says this, but anyway, it just kind of popped in my head. When that plant grows, becomes a seed, first it's a seed, it becomes, let's just say a vegetable, a tomato plant. And as it gets itself grounded in the soil, it becomes rooted. And when it becomes rooted, it's able to think in its own way. It's able to deal with different ideas, such and such, and that's how it goes upward. That's how it expands spiritually. You follow? So in other words, if you're grounded and you're digging deep, as I call it, moving and sifting through stuff that's either, this is not worth it, I chunk it. This I've looked into, chunk that. Meaning I throw it away. It has no value. I studied it and looked into it, and I chunked it. It dealt with. Or I chunked some of it and then kept some of the other. I kept the valuable part and chunked the part that was irrelevant. Okay? So what happens simply is that's how you do in life. That's the way life is about. And part of life, that's what life's about. And that's how it actually it processes you that way. It pushes you to that point. It pushes you to grow up, so to speak. And that's what it is when I was talking about a seed and going back. You have to have roots in order to go higher spiritually. See, the kingdoms of nature may also be expressed in a more archaic format by the Hermetic tradition as 7 principles, as either in are the leveraging points that unify with the principle of correspondence between the light as personal redeemer and impersonal creator. Closing the loop between the eternal intersubjective continuity and discrete outer objective world. Everything that exists thereof is vibration or energy from the first cause infinite pulse. At the Platonic level of pure geometry, we can map the nature of the cosmic cycle using the simple continuity of dimensions and discrete shapes to map the process. So here's the deal. He shows us in discrete continuity and the cycle pointing again to the left, what we call pulse correspondence. And then what happened, this is a tetrahedron, and the energy vibration takes place. And with energy vibration, eventually creates what we call atomic polarity. And with that, with rhythm, it becomes what we call molecular. And with that, it becomes a vegetable because it becomes the cause and the effect. Okay, so each one of these typologies at first saying pulse correspondence, then you have the pulse is a correspondence. Energy is a vibration. Atomic is polarity. All these things have what we call basic roots. And you have eventually to molecular being rhythm. Okay. An example he shows here is the torus deal. Okay. It's flipping of the donut, so to speak. And then you have vegetable, what we call cause and effect, which is the tetrahedron. And then you have eventually to the animal gender, you have, I think I forgot what it's called. And then eventually you work up to intellect and mentalism, which is the highest frame up part of it, which is a upside down triangle. It starts out, and that's how this whole thing works out. And it's a cycle. It's just, again, like you said, with the seed type of deal, with the tree. So the 7 states of natural manifestation inverts leverage from the original primal ether abyss to the reverse in black holes, completed the return to the origin and energetically organizing cosmic material into stars and planets that birth rational creatures who ascend and establish their origin with the leverage of God's Holy Spirit. 3 key points of leverage in the cosmic process, all relating to the origin at 0. So the leverage point cycle, again, the upside down triangle or upside down pyramid, if you want to call it. You have the ether at the left extreme. At the midpoint, you have the energy, the bottom part, and then you have the spirit. So it's, again, the ether, the energy, and the spirit. Okay, that's how it's shown on here on this graph. All right. A tree is a testament to the seed that produced it. Of course, if it's a bad seed, it's going to be a problem. The tree's not going to go too well. But if it's a good seed, it'll gradually germinate. And that's also an illustration of the parable that Jesus speaks about. You see, the seeds that fall on good ground, solid ground, good ground. You see, this is talking spiritually here. That's what Jesus is applying here. And so what happens simply is the ones that don't make it are the ones who get caught up in weeds, or there is falls on rocky ground, so it doesn't germinate. And those seeds are people in some ways, okay? And when they fall on good ground and then they get into the ground and they get solidified, then they become to grow. And they begin eventually to the point they produce fruit in their lives. You see, these are parables, but they show what life is really like. So we're at here. If we know an oak tree makes acorns, we know that an acorn is where the tree came from. If the universe is one overall process, the alpha will be identical to the omega. Unlike seeds that form distinct new generations over time for the universe, its seed will precisely what is generated in its branches or planets. Focus pointedly on the mind of the rational observer according to the metaphysical logic. The appropriate conceptual condition then contains the seed. The ground is implanted in. That is the ground it is planted in, and some water to germinate the seed. In this case, we know the contents of the t=0 state and can easily assign the various characters to it. The abyss became the ground in which the observer, as the white light of Sophia, is planted as a seed of creation, metaphorically watered by the cloud in the near distance. Heaven is a cloud at the root of time that waters the seed of life. A personal being and objective truth are rooted at the same singular issue. We, as spiritual beings, correspond with the eternal root and eternal root and great leverage point of existence itself as t=0. Hold on a second again. Because there is no change in this timeless state. And that's what happened to Phil. It's in the timeless state when he had his spiritual ascension was at Angkor Wat. All representatives of the process from start to finish must be present together at once as it is ensemble from white to black, in the sharpness contract between light and dark, like a personal bright light in an impersonal dark space, fulfilling God's unified capacity to contain both subjective and objective truth at once. You see? So again, he shows this illustration again with the Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 again, as he shows before. Players at the first part, Act 1, the relationship in Act 2, and then 3, the resolution. You see, we meet certain people in our lives. Certain people in our lives can have influence upon us, or they can, in good or bad. And that allows us to grow up on a physical sense, you see. It's the same thing in the spiritual sense also. If we are drawn to that, you see, if you're not drawn to that, simply that won't take place. You'll reincarnate again, and you'll go through that process again. You see, again, there's no hurry with God because God is timeless. You see, He has all the time in the world, so to speak. You grow up whenever it's time for you to grow up. Whenever you feel like it's important, you will tend to make you begin to make a path in that way. You see. Physical reality challenges each one of us to see the truth as it is by its unchanging indifference. It must be set in stone as the physical world reflects, or it would have no value whatsoever. We may as well dream our life away to no consequences if they were not the case. During life, however, the nature of an indifferent and uncaring world turns from one of seeming evil to one that is good for us in the end, because it is our firm teacher, rooted in the union of objective and subjective realities. It is a physical life that allows us to become the leverage point of our own ascension into heaven, making this event the single most reverent event in human history, recorded the world over in many different ways or disguises. And that is the conclusion of this particular Heaven is a Cloud. That was part 2. what we call, he talked about leverage here. And that is it. So I hope that this made some sense to you guys. Again, value valuable to be here. But the point simply is, as I pointed out, um, the parable again with Jesus is enormous with the seed. This is all parallel in what Phil is trying to share. And what it means simply, if you are grounded, that is being objective, you no longer subjective. You're not pulled from one wind to the other wind here and there, whatever people saying. It's a completely different. You're grounded because you now know, in a lot of ways, what truth is. You're becoming to realize you have stability in your life. You're stable. You're not pulled by the winds. You're not pulled by some particular person saying such and such, da 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 da. Well, this is what I think, such and such, and you're just like, nah, it's not right. Chunk it. You're not teaching truth. Okay. And I tell you one good thing to think about here when you're looking at that comparison. Anybody that quote unquote charges you for something in this area of spiritual deal here are not really actually sharing truth. Okay, because someone's their ultimate perspective in the way I look at it, they are they have an ultimate motivation. They're looking at money. And that's not what this is about, folks. So that's one little wise tip. If you give money to certain things, now I'm not talking about, what I'm talking about is you give money to people. I mean, that's the same way as a church, folks. When you give offering in a church, it's the same thing. You do the same thing when you go to church and you give an offering. And you do that. And I did that for over 35 to 40 years of my life. And then a realization of something, this is not right. This is not true. But they would tell you this whole idea that simply is, hey, well, this is benefiting the kingdom of God. No, it's benefiting your pocket. You're stealing from me, you know. But there, some people never wake up from that. And that's okay. That's okay. Because they'll reincarnate again. God is allowing you free will. He allows you to do all those things and make those mistakes, you see. But you're in reality, when you do these things, you go through, and then the only way you can do this, folks, is you have to go through where people screw you. I'm sorry, that's the way to. So you become wiser as you get older, and you understand. Wait a minute, you're not going to do that to me because I've already had that problem in the past. You see, that's what this is about. It's a part of growing up, and it used to be, when I would go to my granddaddy, I'd ask him for certain things, such and such, and he would give me some wisdom. Well, that's not a very good choice there. Okay, that's a very poor choice. You see, so he's been there, so to speak. And I'm not talking about just strictly spiritual. I'm just talking about anything, so to speak, because he's been around for 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, so he knows what's going on, so to speak. But that's also about your life, also. You see, and that's what the critical point here is to say. As you get older, and mainly this only starts taking place when you're about 40 years old. Because now you're suddenly realizing, okay, I've made a lot of mistakes. Now, can I learn and grow up here and let's move in the right direction here. And what I understand simply is that, as Phil has shared with me and others here, you really don't grow up until you get about 40. And that's where the age begins to do that. And that's also what we call basically the prime of your life, so to speak. And then it's a downward slope. So you are already on the clock, so to speak, from 40, whatever you pass. But as Phil said, what you've learned in this lifetime, you come back. You don't lose it. You have a better starting point the next time around. You follow? In other words, what you've gotten to a point, you pass away, and you learn some things that are very critical for you for the next time you reincarnate. So it is a process. It's a long process, so to speak. Okay. We don't know how many times we've been here. Okay. We may have been here 100 times, 1,000 times. Does anybody remember how many times they've been here? No, none of us remember that. We don't remember. Even though there are people that tell you that, oh, yeah, I remember. Really? Really? No, I don't think so. You may remember certain things, but you don't remember how many times you've been here. Again, that's just an illustration simply of how people can quote unquote fool you. And you live and learn, and people like that can get you in trouble. But if you're wise enough at that age, you can basically say, chunk it. So, um, but anyway, I just wanted to share this with you guys today. Gentleman name here says the old church radio service. Well, I'm not a. This is not. I don't know what you mean by old church radio service. I don't know what you mean by that. I'm not a church. But anyway, appreciate you being here. Thank you for listening. But I appreciate you guys being here. Phil will be here live tomorrow, Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be talking about probably some of the stuff that I just shared today, maybe some more and something else you'd like to share. Um, at 9 o'clock, and it will be on probably for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. That will be on my YouTube channel, Discerning What Is True. And you're welcome to come here and watch it either by my Facebook deal or on my YouTube channel, Discerning What Is True. So I just appreciate you all being here, and look forward to tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And as far as I know, we're going to do it not only tomorrow, but we're going to do it also Friday morning. So there'll be two shows, Thursday, one on Thursday and one on Friday with Phil. And then Phil is going to be he's going to be very busy during what I would call the month of December, and I will not be able to have him on air. He's going to be very busy at his job place. So that means there won't be any recordings of Phil. So this will be your last opportunity to hear Phil live. If you like to ask him questions tomorrow, that would be apropos. That would be to your advantage, because that will be your opportunity to do that. And if you can't do it tomorrow, you can do it maybe Friday again. So it's going to be the same time, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Phil will be live and myself. So that's the opportunity that you could do. Again, like I said, if you have questions, that would be a pertinent time to ask because he's going to be gone for a month, and I'm not going to be able to have him on until probably January. So, okay. All right, guys, have a good day. Thank you for being here, and hope you have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, the heart to distinguish what is true and what is false. Take care. Talk to you later.